Greetings. It is the 21st of March, and delighted to have you on this edition of Content Evolution New World. Normally, I will, there is no disclaimer, but I'm going to do one today because of the topic we're talking about. The opinions that you hear on these recordings do not express the general notion of what Content Evolution, its federation and members believe. So everybody who is expressing themselves are doing that as individuals on Content Evolution New World call. So with that said, Mike McGuire, glad to see you. Ready to talk about Boeing as a brand ambassador?
I am, and in fact, I don't know if you saw the other headline that came up this morning or last night about the company we're going to talk about. Apparently, there's been a grand jury convened.
Oof. There you go. Well, so that was probably
criminal.
Yeah, understood. At what level? Is that federal?
No, it's in Seattle.
It's Seattle.
Could be a federal.
That's why I wanted to ask the question. Okay, so it's a Washington.
I can't tell if it was a federal grand jury or a state grand jury.
Okay, very good. Well, it's interesting. There's a go ahead. You had something else?
Justice Department, so it is federal.
Okay, very good.
It is federal.
So here, to kind of give this just a little bit of framing, here at UNC there is a professor, John Casarda. He went by Jack. All right, delightful guy. All right, he has since retired from the university. He started this thing called Global Airport Cities. His economic thesis was that any place that can create the economic vitality to create an international airport, that there are radiating spokes, and that's a hub to creating economic energy for a region. And he had all the data and everything to support that. He said, incremental investment in your airport creates these kinds of multiplier effects, right, for your regional economy. So, interesting guy. The less spoken, that global airport city moves from major, airport capitals around the world every year. But the corollary was that the flag carriers, the countries that have a national airline, that this is their brand ambassador. That this is this is France. When Air France is going from point A to point B, it is the ability to project soft power and who you are. When Singapore Airlines is out there, we're very well thought of, right, airline from a service point of view, that this is projecting some notion about what people think about Singapore, and it arrives at an airport near you. We don't have it in the United States. We do not have a flag carrier, so by default Boeing as the manufacturer is our brand ambassador. We had conversations about this because it is, there are only two major big, companies. There's Airbus, there's Boeing. So that's our brand ambassador, in this space. And so I just, that's the reason for the topic is, it's not doing as good a job of delivering our brand as a nation around the world at the moment. So that is the hypothesis. Let's see if we can move a little bit closer to thesis, not necessarily all the facts, but something that's a little bit more grounded as we move forward. Mike, anything you want to add to the hypothesis for our call today?
No, I think that sums it up. I think it's a great set of starting points for us to move forward with.
I think the Department of Transportation Secretary Bergig yesterday posed it in an interesting context. He was being very diplomatic, but he basically said that Boeing has a quality control problem. He reinforced that the company is a good company, but pointed out that it's the quality control or QA issue that has now become the center of this issue. And I think how you pose what's going on with Boeing in the context of brand ambassador is important at this point. It's because I don't believe, one of the questions earlier on was, were these criminal activities, right? Were these done intentionally? And, very clear, it tends to be more of a QA versus something more nefarious.
Well, I would point out that a while back, when I was studying, the other kissing cousins in this space are, GE aircraft engines, Rolls-Royce. There are only a handful of companies that make the engines that you can bolt onto the airframe, right? And General Electric said, we're redefining what business we're in. The reason that we exist is going to be, going forward, we deliver reliable thrust. That is the be all and end all of why they make the aircraft engines. And there were implications downstream, like because of statistically we do a better job of keeping the airplane in the air, your insurance costs are going to go down, right? So that's a good reason to buy our engines versus the competition. I think that Boeing, from an ethos point of view, needs to be able to elevate the reason that the brand exists to something that is, more than, yeah, we've been a long-term, successful manufacturer, and this is a glitch. We're going to be getting better. You can count on it. I think that they need to be able to say, look, we are recommitting ourselves to being the safest and most reliable aircraft, right? Airframe, manufacturer on the planet, which is exactly what happened to Akio Toyoda when he took over at Toyota, is that they'd been course and speed to be the largest car company in the world. And it's messed up their QA. It messed up their total quality, commitments, the Kaizen, the Kanban, all that other kind of stuff. And he said, we need to get smaller to get back to the Toyota that people expect us to be. So I'll just stop there. That I think that this moment of reckoning, the fact that QA is the issue that you brought up, Tim, I think that's exactly right. But I think that if you can't make a high quality product in this space, it starts to make people nervous to fly, right? And they start to look at, they look at the records and say, am I flying on a Boeing 737 MAX? That's a deselect now. I don't, I'm putting that on my list of do not book me on that flight. Those are problems for people who own those aircraft.
The one thing I want to add, though, is that and now if you put yourself in the seat of an airline CEO, the customer, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, we've got enough freaking problems with, angry passengers, disrupting flights, drunk pilots, keeping people on the runway for 8 hours. The last bleeping thing we need is chunks of the airplane falling off. And on the news, all you see is United, right? You don't see Boeing. All you see is the United plane with the fire trucks around it and everything like that, right? And so, in my relationship as the end customer is with United. It's not with Boeing, right? My experience is with United, and the challenge I think that Boeing has is not with the everyday public. It's with these airline CEOs that the product that they have isn't going to impact, obviously life and limb, but their reputation anymore. It's a challenging enough business. They don't need one of their suppliers to give them products that are falling apart literally, on the,
But that would cause you to say, well, if it's damaging our reputation as a branded carrier, then maybe we need to source our airplanes from somebody other than the company that's giving us problems, right? So that's a B2B problem with a B2B2C outcome. It puts China, right, in a more favorable position as a new entrant into the larger space that where they probably would be held back by quite a few years, right? That they're saying, hey, we're going to be more promiscuous. We're going to look a little bit broader. Hey, Embraer, can you make a bigger airplane?
Exactly. The Brazilians will come in with Embraer building a better plane. Bombardier will come in from Canada building, a different type of regional jet. It's not just Boeing and Airbus. It's there's a lot of suppliers that are out there, and
Bombardier, built a C-class plane. That's all right, but Airbus bought it, right? Because
that's true.
They didn't want Bombardier to succeed in that space, so they said, "We'll take it off your hands, guys," right? And they did a lot of price competition to kind of force them to go there.
Yep.
Kevin,
yes,
who did you say bought that airplane company?
No, not the plane company. The program that Bombardier had to scale up an airplane to more of the small, slim size Airbus. Is Airbus bought it?
Airbus, Jesus.
So they said, "Hey, we'll do this," and they basically, between Boeing and Airbus, they kind of killed the profitability in the space by deeply discounting until, the smallest, entrant, which is Bombardier, said this isn't going to be and say, "Oh, well, we'll buy that from you." The word on the street was it was for $1, right? Because of the anything that you already, that sounds very familiar to me, because when I sold PC Company to Legend, today Lenovo, along with a number of other executives, part of that deal was, please take the install base off our hands, because it's an ongoing liability, and somebody needs to be able to do that, because you can't just exit the space, because you still have people who own your equipment, and you have an obligation, to do something for them as long as you're still, the parent company still in business. So you need to move it from point A to point B so that they have responsibility for that ongoing stewardship. Okay. Glad to have you with us, Kyle. Any thoughts percolating as you follow here?
No, this is way outside of my wheelhouse of what I know, other than learning a lot from you guys on this, because nuts.
Are you going to replace MCAS with generative AI? No.
Exactly.
No, it's hallucinating the landing. No.
Yeah, it always amazes me. I mean, I what this ultimately comes down to is a culture shift. It always amazes me when you have not just one bad event, but a series of them in a row, and it indicates to me that there's been a fairly significant culture shift, and it's going to take them a while to unwind it. So I find this stuff fascinating.
Well, to your point, Kyle, I mean, that Kevin alluded to it. I mean, for decades they were kind of held up, right, as the icon of quality and safety,
right,
in big plane manufacturing. And Tim's point about looking at it, kind of the potential criminal charges, is I agree with you, Tim, but I think the thing they're going to focus on is not blaming an individual engineer, right? It's going to be back to the culture, and it's going to be, they haven't said exactly, but I'm assuming it's criminal negligence is what they're going to be going after them for. And, I think there's if you're driving your car unsafely and you happen to kill somebody, it could be involuntary or voluntary manslaughter. Negligence is one of those factors that can feed into it. And I think that's probably, I think if you've read some of the stories, right, they were preventing individual engineers from being questioned by, oh, that's right, it wasn't the FAA inspectors, it was Boeing itself inspectors, to just find out, guys, who's working on this plane before we delivered it to Alaska or this one to United, and where are the bolts? And the thing that really kind of, you all know that I am by far not particularly smart, but I'm sometimes clever. I didn't know you manufactured a big jetliner like that with holes in it, and then you went back in and put the doors in, or a plug. I was like, that seems like, I get it from a design perspective, but that seems, doors might be the one thing you wouldn't want to just like pull in and out of the fuselage frame, but apparently it's a design thing. And that to me is just like, those 4 bolts, that's a QA thing, but it's, again, I don't think the light needs to fall on the individual line manufacturing teams. It's their management. And the thing I think we and I have talked about is like, wow, how did the FAA let that happen? Or we as consumers or whatever. It's like, oh, hey, by the way, you guys go ahead and do the safety inspection, Boeing guys, and send us some paperwork and tell us how.
I mean, I can imagine, having, received things that I put together here at home. I'm not going to give you IKEA stories, but, just is that sometimes, the bolt assembly to whatever the main thing is that it's integral, yet you can't take it off, right? It's simply part of, whatever it is. And it was welded, in place. And then, so if you get a door plug assembly, as it were, you couldn't install it. You couldn't even put it in because it came with, the bolts there, right? And it has to. It's like what I'm saying is it's a design problem to some degree. That
right.
It's a separate part, right? To put it in, it should be integral to the design. That you can't even put it in and try to install it because it's already there. Right. And so that's the kind of thinking that would be necessary to say, from a safety point of view, it has to be integral to the subassembly. And, Boeing, before they moved their headquarters from Chicago away from the people who are doing the work, final assembly at right now, final assembly. And they used to be kind of like other manufacturers. They made all the stuff that they needed themselves and put it together. They started to be very dependent on subcontractors. And to the degree that the subcontractors weren't minding the specs, this is why I tell companies when I advise them, I said, you shouldn't think about supply chain. You should be thinking about value chains, okay? Because every step along the way, somebody is adding value to ultimately what you're going to deliver. And you need to be in lockstep with how does my value add contribute to what's happening over here? And if you don't have line of sight to that because you're just manufacturing to spec, and the specs might not, be exactly what they should be, and you're not having a conversation, that's a problem. You get Takata airbags and you ruin an entire, auto industry for a moment in time because somebody back here didn't get the total quality management and, Kaizen story. And they just said, hey, we're going to stuff newspaper in there, right? Not good.
Yeah, maybe these big companies should follow the Musk model, require the CEO to sleep on the floor of the manufacturing plant for a while, and then things wouldn't happen like that.
Well, seriously, but I mean, that's again, that goes back to culture. Like, Musk wouldn't let it stand.
Yeah.
Right. That it was that bad. And clearly, the door flying off the plane didn't have that same kind of impact at Boeing. And it's like, why not?
I mean, the legendary, okay, the McDonald's management team is forced to go and work at a McDonald's at least once a year, right? So that they are in touch with, that environment where the customers are and what the current procedures look like.
Yep.
And that's when they kind of killed, the Mech Cafe thing, because they went in and realized how much complexity they had added to the work environment. And they said, bad idea. Let's stop doing this. Okay. You can have coffee.
But we're not Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. And, you had kind of created a McDonald's inside of a McDonald's, and it was kind of like, oops, all right, this is the right thing to do. We'll go back to doubling down on McRib.
Yeah, I want to point out one practical aspect of this that we've not brought up in the chain of what happened. My understanding from reading a couple of the reports is that in this particular case with that particular door and those 4 bolts, the responsibility relied on the final inspector of the guys who were doing the work. My understanding, he did not do that, or he either farmed it out to somebody else, but he signed off on it, even though the work was not done.
Oh, man.
That's
And
where
he hadn't personally seen that work.
That's right. That's where the criminal piece has been brought to the center. But having said that, Buttigieg's right in the sense that that's a Q&A problem.
Absolutely.
Because in essence, in this case, the chain of command basically was not followed, and as a result, you ended up with that problem. So that's why I think his version of, or his concept anyway, is the Q&A without getting into the nuts and bolts of saying you didn't do the nuts and bolts.
Right. I was just jesting with Kyle before, but I would like to just, maybe retract for a moment. If it's a definable, repeatable, right, activity, then maybe inspection ought to be done by robots, not by people. Because the fact is that, like what we're seeing right now with X-rays and other things, where the typology of what you're seeing and being able to do pattern recognition and so on and so forth. I don't know. It might be better, for some, critical parts of these things for that inspection, because the robot will never, say, I was sick that day. Right?
Well, the other thing is you can outfit a robot with lots of things like torque wrenches and things like that, and just have it go through and go, oh, okay, that's enough torque on that. Oh, but I'm not seeing that 3rd bolt. Where's the other? And you can do that, and those are they'd be nice if those were FAA robots, not Boeing. That's we're going to be back to this. I think it's always easy to resolve back to, it's the drive for profit, QA, be damned, we got to hit our numbers. And, by the way, we have we've managed to take all the responsibility for inspection, onto our own books as opposed to the FAA. I think what I was getting at is this is a case where we've seen a lot of people in the last 30 years and politicians talk about, let's make government smaller. This is a case where I think a lot of people will, I would hope, kind of through these tragedies think, okay, maybe it is reasonable to have the government responsible and make sure they have budget for, handling these inspections. Doesn't have to be for everything, but certainly for large metal tubes, flying 30,000 feet in the air with 300 people on them, I kind of think that's worth spending some more money on. And that may be something, I agree with you, Tim. Buttigieg says it's all about the QA and the culture to a degree. And that's why I was saying earlier, let's not look at blaming the individual who did or didn't, tighten the bolts down or put them in. That's the scapegoat that I hope doesn't, we don't see that it does, that the executives do take responsibility for it.
Yeah. But again, where that got drilled down on the individual issue was that a step was not done, which could have been criminal intent. But having said that, there's been 5 or 6 other events that have happened that now fit under the broader issue of Q&A, or excuse me, quality control.
and systems, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
opposed to, that it could be an ad hominem fallacy to look at it as, one person, is that if you're seeing it, happen periodically, even if it isn't in the same system, you're saying that there is a systemic issue in terms of the way that you're inspecting your work.
And I think that isn't there. I'd say there's a linkage to what Rick was saying earlier about, as far as consumers are concerned, it's United, right? I'm not thinking about Boeing, it's United. There's the linkage too, is the QA about their own maintenance and inspection, that the airliners, that the carriers have their own teams. And, it seems to be, and this is where I would track that too far down, is a lot of the United issues probably are going to be laid at the feet of Boeing, but I believe it was the incidents happened or their malfunctions occurred. It wasn't through safety inspections done by United, either pilots or engineers, right? It was
Step up
shit fell off, and it was, or the wheels fell off. Well, it's designed to land without those wheels. It's okay. And we weren't seeing it. Now I think that's the other thing, Tim, is when they start with a grand jury like this, those subpoena powers become pretty interesting, because they're probably going to go to United and all the other carriers and say, give us the records for the last N number of years that you've had these particular planes in place. We want to see your inspection logs and your issues. And that's going to be also very interesting.
I mean,
and I think
the entire value of the airplane is based on those logs. They actually do a pretty good job with the logs, because you're killing your own resale value if you don't do a good job on that.
Right.
If you were thinking from a C-suite perspective that everything we were doing was in the pursuit of increasing shareholder value, I can understand some of the financial engineering that they were doing, but you have to still deliver a good product, right, for that financial engineering to not collapse on you, which is where they are now. They don't have the stock price that they thought they wanted to have, because the incidents are dragging it down.
Right. And I think, when you talk about corporate leadership's responsibility, you and I talked about this, Kevin. I think I do want to hear what everybody has to say, but Rick in particular, the language used by Boeing executives is so neutered and corporate speak. The thing that occurred to me last night when I was looking at a few notes was, wouldn't it be nice if the CEO or the executive board staff said, we're not going to get paid till we fix this, right? And that multiple third parties can inspect the process, make sure we followed through on these issues. We don't get paid. That will never happen. That would never happen.
Yeah.
I would be shocked. But I think that, combined with perhaps a little bit more actual human language and words, would be a good start.
Yeah.
Are you talking about?
You know what their biggest fear is, though, Mike? So sorry, Kevin, but their biggest fear is order cancellations.
Sure.
Right? Because that's their future revenue stream, right? And so my suspicion, again, looking at this, is that they're focused on the CEOs of the airlines and figuring out a way to make things right with the airlines, because the airlines are like, our brand's the one that's in the shitter right now. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you cancel that order for 300 737s over the next, 10 years, Southwest Airlines, that goes right to their stock price, right? That cancellation, as soon as that happens, goes right to their stock price, because that's how, Wall Street, values those companies, right? And so my suspicion is that two things looking at this, and one, I'm glad I don't work in PR for Boeing, because I know the challenge that they've got.
Would you like us to add that to your prompt on your GPT?
Right, exactly.
By the way, I
don't
care anybody to talk to me about Boeing.
Number one, my guess is they know exactly what happened. Right? They know exactly what happened. They've gotten the root cause analysis on this thing, and someone screwed up somewhere, and someone outsourced to a vendor, or someone didn't do their job, or whatever. So, I think that they know exactly what happened, right? And they're trying to stop the bleeding, which is with their customers, the people who buy the planes. And they probably also have a separate track with the FAA and or other regulatory bodies trying to make sure that those organizations feel comfortable with those planes flying into their airspace or their countries or whatever. I think that their last concern, to be honest with you, is that a customer, an individual ticket buyer, is not going to want to hop on a Boeing plane, because I think most of the time, if I need to get to Chicago, right, you know, for business or whatever, and it's only a Boeing 737, I'm gonna trust Delta to get me there, safely.
Yeah, so one of the big actions that they've taken is that 20 years ago they spun out the company that makes airframes. That became a separate entity, and they have taken steps to buy it back. They said, you know what? That's going to be under our control, right? Here at the parent company, we're buying that company was spun out, and we're going to bring that back into our management system.
Yeah,
Well,
but was that Malaysia that they outsourced it to? I remember reading something about the airframes and selling planes to Malaysia Air, and I don't remember the detail, but is that right or not?
Well, I mean, they clearly sold planes to Malaysia Air. I don't think they were making the airframes in Malaysia.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they have a global supply chain, and that's the airframe stuff is pretty big, right? I remember when was it Cadillac had their own airplanes, because they were making bodies in Turin, Italy, and then they were sticking it in the airplane and they were shipping them to Detroit by air. I forgot which. It was some up.
Yeah, I think they've outsourced some of their maintenance hubs to some of these folks. And after 9/11, it was an issue, right? Of who were the people that were crawling all over the insides of these aircraft under the guise of a scheduled maintenance instead of union workers in Seattle or South Carolina or wherever Boeing had operations. And that that was part of the whole post 9/11 question was who gets access to airplanes and what's their security clearance and all of that stuff. But,
Yeah.
Well, there's a have you guys talked about the merger with McDonnell Douglas? Because I think that's a big part of this too, where McDonnell Douglas is a defense contractor and their priorities and workflows, like this might get back to a cultural thing where, the sense of ownership
Right.
might be fractured, right? That oh, it's just a government thing, that if I was at Boeing before, I have a sense of pride in Boeing, and then if you merge with someone who's got likely very, very different methodologies and compartmentalization and things like that, there's probably something there as
and
well.
different track record when they were doing commercial with DC-10.
Yeah.
Because it didn't have a good track record. And the question, is that when you do M&A, if you're only looking at the spreadsheet, you're probably missing something, right? That you need to be able to do cultural due diligence to understand, should these two cultures come together, what's the likely outcome, right? And I tell people that, and this is true, the day that they announced Daimler Chrysler, I could have told you that isn't going to work, right? Because Stuttgart and Detroit are not, those engineers, those line workers, they're not on the same page, and they have different way of thinking about their work, and it's not going to come together, right? You're not going to bring Stuttgart to Detroit, and Stuttgart is certainly going to reject Detroit in Germany. So that was destined to come back apart. And I think from a cash infusion and getting a fast reboot on total quality management, Boeing would be well advised to try to partner with a Japanese company right now. get a Mitsubishi Heavy Industry, or get, some other company that can do it with Denso, all right, that does, um, parts and supply and value chain management for the entire auto industry for Japan. Is get somebody in there that knows how to make all this stuff come together better. We shipped Deming, Edward Deming, away from the United States. They said, he's crazy. After 16 years in exile in Japan, they said, who's this genius over there that's doing statistical quality management? And they said, well, it's an American, all right? Bring him back, okay? So I think that Boeing knows how to do it, but they need to reawaken their instincts, right? I also think that the guys in Chicago need to move back to Seattle. I think they need to move the headquarters back to where the work is being done, because it's okay to have a distributed management structure where the work is being done on a distributed basis around the planet. But still, Seattle is the place where final assembly takes place. And, this is like, the way that we split up NASA, that, 6 seconds after launch in Florida, Texas takes over. Why? Well, because, Lyndon Johnson got involved and got a big earmark of money for NASA and said, you're going to put this thing over here in Texas. All right. Had nothing to do with it being the right way to manage, ascent and descent of vehicles. But
well, I think the archaic notion of, I say, I use archaic because I'm going to talk about my experience, and I'm old, is that notion, and we've all worked in these environments, right? The notion that the CEO or the president is 2 floors above where you are and could show up anytime to ask you very pointed questions about what's going on is still, I think, an important governing factor in this, to your point about moving the exec staff back from Chicago to Seattle, right? It's not that they're all engineers in the C-suite at Boeing, but the fact that they're up there, they would be up there and could literally walk down and look at 10 of these things out in the hangars being assembled and say, somebody needs to, where's the guy who does inspections on door bolts? Where's that team? Let me see this team. How is this working? Again, that sounds kind of old fashioned, but it's a real thing. It also, I think, to your point, to add to your point, Kevin, is it also gives the people working in those manufacturing facilities a sense of ownership by the senior staff. It's like, if the senior staff is 4 hours away in Chicago, it's just think time zone, man, I'm busting my ass here at 8 o'clock at night in Seattle. And I know, the CEO's at the Bulls game right now, right? Or whatever. And, anything I might report or need to, get executive staff input on, it's going to be a time delay and they're 4 hours away. So, gosh, I don't know when this is going to get resolved. I think there is something to what you're saying, Kevin, particularly this notion of that the executive staff is there where those things are being bolted together. Sounds like maybe that's a nice PR move, but I think it's important for not for external perception, but for the internal teams.
No, I'm talking about getting back to, that, we're going to make the highest quality, world beating, plane on the planet. And we're so enthusiastic about this work, all right, that it's an integrated team from top to bottom, all right. But if they'd said, well, we're moving headquarters, to, the biggest financial capital on the planet, so we have better access to, to finances. Well, that in Chicago, all right. Oh, we're moving to the technology capital of the United States. We're going to move to Silicon Valley. Okay. That's not Chicago. I don't know why they moved to Chicago. Maybe somebody's
corporate
tax.
I think it's an Illinois corporate tax thing. Was the main reason.
Interesting.
I don't. Again, to people listening, Mike's going to go double check that.
But would they have moved in this day and age? Would they have moved to Texas or to
Right.
Florida, for the
Probably.
same reason. I don't know. So,
I don't know.
I mean, it's a different era. It's X number of years.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, when Boeing made the move, that was the biggest get for Chicago or Illinois in a long time. Getting a major company to come in as Sears was declining, a major headquarters to come in there. But what the military does when they have like the V-22 Osprey had a couple of crashes. They go into a stand down mode, right? A safety stand down mode,
Correct.
where all of the crews go through some basic training again, remedial training. Every aircraft is inspected, and then when they lift it, they make a proclamation that we're confident in this fleet and we're confident in the people who are operating them. And I would think that with Boeing, again, from a PR perspective, and it's easy to say, sitting on the sidelines, is that a stand down for the teams that assemble and design the planes for 2 weeks or whatever would be a great move. However, I'm sure the pushback would be delays in deliveries, delays in revenue recognition, and all sorts of other financial considerations that would prevent that from being a viable solution. To say, everybody, we're going to have we're going to go back to a classroom for a couple of days, and then we're going to conduct inspections on every whatever airframe, or work with every airline on the best way to conduct these inspections and do it. But my guess is that the financial
100%,
consideration.
100% agree. But if you remember, the beginning of the story, when they started to implement MCAS, is they said, we're going to give you $1 million rebate, right? I think it was to Southwest, right? If you have to retrain your people. So they tied their hands behind their back financially, right? And even though they knew that retraining would probably be a good idea, so we're not going to do it. Please make the plane so that we never have to train people. And it's kind of like, it's a new
That
system.
we train them once, and that the plane, every lavatory service is the issue is the and blueprint is the same, and everything like that. I get that. However, if your crews and your ground crews and everyone else are concerned that and they're giving the plane extra scrutiny on the ground, because they're concerned of a panel falling off. I mean, that perhaps could use a little reassurance from the manufacturer, right? That guy on the ramp could probably use a little reassurance from the manufacturer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm back to design for a second, but Honda Jet is very close to us here in Greensboro. And it's a pretty successful, small, jet program. And the interesting design thing is that their engines are mounted on a strut above the wing, right?
Right.
As opposed to it being below the wing. And if you listen to the problems that they're describing, is that the problem is that they put a much bigger engine on that wing, and to make sure that it wasn't scraping the ground, right? They needed to move it forward and up, and I said, design a strut and put it above the wing the way Honda did, right? Because that probably would have, now what the strength of a strut would be to hold that big old engine, I don't know, right? But they have all kinds of different, like dual strut, kinds of things that NASA is doing now, where it bolts to both the top of the fuselage and the wing. They have those designs. I just think that wasn't enough out of box thinking. They needed a quick program to respond to Airbus with a program that looked pretty, good and was selling well. And unfortunately, this is kind of like the Coke versus Pepsi challenge. And they were Coke and they got suckered right into responding, as opposed to, let's not just redesign, something that we already have in inventory. What's the world beater for that, right?
But one of the things, though, that if I were to offer a recommendation to Boeing, would be, how many times a day does a 737 MAX 8, MAX 9, or whatever take off and land safely?
Mm-hmm.
And how many people have gotten from point A to point B safely on this aircraft and with no issues, versus the incidents that have been high profile. and point to it as a, you know, those issues as an aberration, not necessarily a systemic failure that's going to be you know, that's going to, you know, be replicated in every aircraft, right? You know, highlight that you know, these were one-off type of you know, one-off type of incidents, and that, you know, again, you know, however many million people in an average week safely got on and off one of those planes. And then, you know, I think it would be very risky for them to say, you know, with the incidents that we've had, you know, we actually highlighted the redundancy and the safety of these aircraft as these, you know, planes were able to get back down on the ground, you know, safely, and, you know, thankfully with no injuries on the ground, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know, you know, versus what happened with the first Maxes, which involved, you know, fatalities
Right.
and tragedies because of the air control, you know, the lever
MCAS.
issue. Yeah, right. You know, so
Yeah.
you know, again, I think there's a difference between a quality issue, you know, with you know, with, you know, where the inspections are, you know, having that impact versus the initial one that, you know, seemed to be a software issue that could take the plane right into the ground, you know.
Well, you know, Airbus, you know, if you guys recall a few incidents 10 years or more ago, I think, you know, they had an issue. Now, was it a design issue, I think, with the 320? I think it was a design issue with the front landing gear. I don't know if you guys remember that, but the famous
Go sideways. Remember, then there were videos of the JetBlue planes coming in with the front landing gear being
not completely down.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I was on one of those flights. I did a touch and go at Logan Airport on one of the JetBlue things, and then I actually, true story, was in the airport. I was at LAX when that pilot had to do the wheelie for 2 miles and bring it down. And I did call a friend of mine at the LA Times and said, "Here's a flight I was on a month ago on one of these planes, and they had a landing gear issue." To their credit, you know, Airbus and JetBlue, you know, didn't run away from it too quickly. And I'm not accusing Boeing of anything like that, but they did recover from that, and Airbus kind of made the fix on the planes. You know, these are, you know, we sometimes forget about just how damn complex these things are to build. And, you know, I think that's the other thing I find interesting is the dynamic of, if you know a little bit about how complex they are, that makes the QA thing and the culture thing at the executive staff even more galling, I think, to a lot of us. Is like, boy, it's hard. And you guys have done so well over the decades building these complex systems. To your point, Rick, yeah, I would agree. It's like, hey, look, not running away from this issue, but investigators will let us know, the FAA, we will, you know, as we go through these processes, try to identify the issue in the process that causes this. But, you know, for 10 years or however many years they've been in service, you know, that many flights. The problem is that becomes even harder. You know, I think it gets somewhat harder, Rick, right? Because of the fact that it's not just the plugs on the fuselage. It was the MCAS system that there was a lot of obfuscation about that, right, when you read through the history of it. And I think that makes it even more incumbent on Boeing to probably it's not just PR and corporate communications. Again, this is about how you can inform the rest of your company and partners. This is being taken seriously. We are dealing with this the best we can. We need outside help. And apparently that's, you know, when the subpoenas or the news broke Friday about the criminal investigation, not that they had any choice. They were very clear, the exec staff, to both, you know, the external world and internal world. We're participating in this, and we expect everybody in the company to as well. So that's nice for them to say, but I think it'll be interesting to see. I was curious what you guys think about, Tim mentioned, you know, Secretary Buttigieg. I don't know how prominent they're going to, the FAA or the Department of Transportation is going to be, except for the NTSB investigators and whatnot. Tim, I didn't see that interview. Was he pretty pointed, or saying, you know, they're going to pay attention to it, but I haven't heard anything special.
He did it yesterday, and basically he was just responding to a reporter's question.
Mm-hmm.
And he was Buttigieg is really smart in the sense of how he speaks, and is very careful to not be, quote unquote, controversial in a sense. So he used that language, but he actually, I think, was right on the money in defining the problem, because he did not, like I said, they know, as you pointed out, or Kevin or somebody pointed out, they know what the problem is. There's no covering up that. They know where the mistake was made.
Mhm.
But from Boeing's standpoint, they don't believe it was intentional.
Oh yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that it was right. It's the negligence, right? It's the the criminal negligence or what that I think is probably what they're. I'd have to go read the. Well, other than its alert, I don't think we're going to be able to get much on the subpoena. There's usually some documentation that's made available once the stuff's been served. But I think to your point about how his as being a very intelligent and cautious speaker. Didn't he work at McKinsey?
Did he?
Yeah.
Yes, he did. He
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting that you have somebody with that experience that's actually, the head of the Department of Transportation, right? Or the Secretary of Transportation. He's going to know those, the song and dance if he sees it, right,
Well,
on any of the
he's been a small
presentations.
town mayor. He's been McKinsey. He's had a couple of opportunities to,
Mhm.
just,
Well, but again, I think the purpose of the way he handled it was to try to calm down the
Yeah.
concerns about using anybody, because I was thinking personally over the last 2 weeks I've because I was in Hawaii working on our condo, I flew the 737 MAX 8 both ways on Southwest. And when I got on the plane, I didn't realize that's what the plane was until I looked at the car.
Little insert, right?
And as I'm sitting on the runway thinking about, oh crap, I'm on this plane that blew up, or door fell off. In fact, I was sitting in the exact same row. But nobody.
That's good. That's actually good conditioning therapy, Tim. I think
But there was nobody on the plane that complained, and I suspected that may have been because it was Southwest and not United. But United has not taken the 737 MAX 8s out except for the ones that were under
grounded.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to this whole issue of the impact at the customer level. I think, Rick, going back to what you were saying about looking at the positive things that occur with their aircraft, I think and you can list all the statistics you want, but at a certain level, it's like no matter what happens, you can know for a fact that there are only so many shark attacks in the ocean every year, but it still scares the hell out of you. Yeah. And I think that they have that situation where they got people saying, "Whoa, I don't know if I want to get in that water." Yeah. I think that's a problem.
Then you've got idiots like me who did a shark dive in Nassau.
Well, there always has to be some test monkey somewhere, Tim.
Yeah.
But the other thing, I was just looking up the CEO of Boeing. I don't know how capable he is as a CEO, but his background is not in engineering. He's got a degree in accounting. Right. And it's just like that. I think maybe that's where the problem lies. I mean, how in the hell do you get a company that is, by any stretch of the imagination, an engineering company? Yeah. And then put somebody who knows how to check the pluses and minuses in your books. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's what Kevin was talking about, used by the phrase financial engineering, right?
Yeah,
that's why that guy was brought in.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
And by the way, financial engineering
not always bad.
No, it's not. When done well, it can give you that moment of time to be able to get to your next game and be able to do something good. But I would say the financial engineering was, the downfall of General Electric is that at one time, because I was advising, kind of off to the side, and I know the person who was running that part of the business, Joe Henson Jr. Joe Henson
But
Sr.
you-
played
but-
poker in my basement. Okay. And the fact is that during the Welsh era, a lot of the ways that they closed the books was, stuff that was happening from General Electric Credit Corp out of Stamford, Connecticut. All right. Not out of Fairfield. And, they kind of lost track of, right. The reason that business unit existed was so that you could finance buying an aircraft engine or finance buying a hydroelectric dam or whatever it is, the hospital buying, but it became a means unto itself. And when the banking crisis happened, GE took the same hit because Wall Street looked at them as a financial organization as much as a manufacturing organization. It is pulling itself back up by the bootstraps now, but it is a much smaller organization than it used to be. And, there's all kinds of things that are, history that I can tell you from mentoring people during that era. But
Kevin, the
it.
last Intel CEO was a financial. He was the
Mhm.
CFO,
Mhm.
and they realized, that he was not making progress, and so that's why they brought in Gelsinger, who was an engineer
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
already 15, 20 years with them. It's the same scenario.
Yeah, and the fact is, the people who are going to be imaginative to think about what's next. Okay, what is the next cycle of growth or product line or offerings? That is normally not going to come from the imagination of the people who manage the finances of an organization, which is a resource allocation issue as opposed to a projection of what's next. But with that said, there's some very strong people who've done good work in those areas, but normally they think of themselves as being transitional.
Yeah.
The very
Right.
best. And sometimes, that's the case when you're under a litigation, moment, is that you will get someone who is, a lawyer is leading the business, all right, because they're going through a moment of turbulence where legal needs to lead, okay, as opposed to, the line management to be able to get from point A to point B. Are those, the very best, right? No, not necessarily, but who's the guy that came in? Who's the vice chair now at IBM? He came in from government, from Wall Street. I can't remember his name, whatever. But with that said, we have, companies keep on making headlines, and we have fun, having a moment to talk about it as opposed to just reading about it. So thanks for coming together today, and looking forward to our call next week. Topic TBD, but we're beginning to get back into the habit of booking guests. But these topic discussions are a lot of fun too.
Kevin, I'm going to send you
Yes, Tim.
a potential one for next week.
Oh,
Okay.
excellent.
Is it ripped from the headlines?
Well, it was from NVIDIA's conference. One
Okay.
key
Fantastic.
that I wrote about.
Still being led by a talented engineer that was Jim Spore's next door neighbor, evidently.
Yeah,
So,
and also Jensen is one of the smartest men I've ever met in my entire life.
well, there you go.
All right, I got to run.
Thank you, Tim, for being with us. Rick,
Thank
Bruce,
you all.
Mike,
I really
all the best.
appreciate all of you. It's wonderful. Thanks
Be
again.
You too,
intentional.
Bruce.
All right,
Cheers.
y'all.
See ya.
Bye.